Zach is back. It's the Zach Gelb Show on Fox Sports 920 The Jersey.
Another Eagles season in the books. The way it started, you may be a little bit disappointed, but we know what the Eagles' talent level was this year. And it pretty much ended how you would expect it to going into the season. And now it's all about the offseason, as Howie Roseman has a big, tall task, and that's surrounding the right pieces around his franchise quarterback in Carson Wentz, and also fixing the cornerback position for the Philadelphia Eagles. Someone that always brings his A game, and that's Josh Paunil, who does a great job covering the Birds for Birds 24/7, is kind enough to hop on board with us right now. Josh, appreciate a few minutes. Thanks for the time. Happy New Year, and how are you?
Good, Zach. Thanks for having me. Always enjoy it.
Well, thank you so much. We appreciate it. So let's take care of the interesting notes from the game on Sunday. It had nothing to do with on the field. It actually happened to be in the Lincoln Financial Field press box, and that was Jeff McLane getting ejected. I still don't understand this story, why they would eject him. You're in the press box on Sunday. Give us a little bit more perspective on what happened.
Yeah, I mean, it was absolutely crazy. I mean, afterward, one of the beat guys who sits next to me, he's been, covering the Eagles for I think about 30 years, and even he said that he's never seen anything like it. But it all started after Eagles touchdown drive in the second half. They had one of the touchdown drives extended by a roughing the passer penalty. I think it was Randy Gregory hit Wentz in the face or something when Wentz was scrambling out, and so it was unclear, when the penalty occurred and who it was on initially. And so we're talking in the press box trying to figure it out, and then one of the Eagles PR guys yells out, "Quiet down." And we're like, are you kidding me? And it's something that he's done in the past. When he did it, he actually did it in Baltimore when the Eagles traveled to play the Ravens a few weeks ago, and the Baltimore guys laughed because they couldn't believe, he was trying to just silence everybody. So we tell them, like, we're just trying to figure out what the penalty is, like, relax. And so then McLane and the Eagles PR guy start having a back and forth, but it wasn't particularly nasty or anything. And then McLane suggests that they go talk in the back of the press box, just one-on-one, to kind of settle things down, and so they aren't talking, across the press box to each other, and they can just talk privately. And then they come back about, a few minutes later, and everything is fine. I mean, people just forget about it. And then about 20 minutes later, Ann Gordon, one of the Eagles' head communication / PR people, comes in and tells McLane he's getting ejected. And we're all shocked, and we're all wondering what he did. And at first, she wouldn't tell anybody what he did. She would just say, he's ejected, that's all you need to know. And then when, people kept asking why, and she was like, well, if you keep asking, I'll be happy to throw everybody out of here. And we're just like, what is happening right now? Like, it was the most surreal thing I've ever seen in a press box. And so eventually she says that McLane violated the fan code of conduct.
He's not a fan,
like,
though.
what are you talking about? And so it made absolutely no sense. McLane obviously ends up getting ejected, and then, people start tweeting about it and everything. And it was just crazy. And then the thing that kind of frustrated, I thought that was it was just incompetence at its worst. But what I thought was the worst part was afterward, Ann Gordon just started lying to try to cover herself, and she said that she was the one that recommended Zach Brown, the Eagles PR guy, and McLane, go out and talk to settle things. And it was actually McLane who initiated it so he could settle things down. That's why I thought it was crazy, was because McLane is the one that actually stopped, the back and forth. It was like, all right, well, let's just talk privately about this. Like, we don't need to go back and forth in front of the press box. And then Ann Gordon tried to take credit for it, and then they lied about, McLane was yelling to shut up to everybody. And it's just bananas. And I can't believe that they haven't issued an apology or anything, because it's just wild. I mean, I couldn't believe it.
It's amazing how people that have a background in communications just did an awful job communicating. That's the thing I take away from it, Josh.
That's what confused me the most was if you're the Eagles PR, your job is literally to generate as much good publicity as possible for the team, and they went out of their way to do the opposite. That's why it was mind-blowing to me because of all people, for the PR staff to generate this negative publicity for the team. I mean, obviously the Eagles win was meaningless, but still, you beat the Cowboys, and even in a meaningless game, I'm sure fans would rather hear about, I don't know, Carson Wentz throwing 2 touchdowns or Zach Ertz playing well or this or that, and having that be the main storyline if you're the Eagles rather than you just acting like it was crazy. I mean, that's just the only word I could use to describe it.
Now, I felt bad for Jeff when I was reading that on Twitter as we're talking to Josh Paunil, who does a great job covering the Eagles for Birds 24/7. All right, tomorrow, hopefully everyone keeps their voices down at the Howie Roseman press conference and no one gets the boot. I will be in attendance, and I'm a very loud person as well. But let me just ask you this. What do you expect to hear from Howie Roseman tomorrow, and what do you want to hear from Howie when he talks to the media tomorrow?
Well, honestly, I expect a lot of non-committal answers. Obviously, we're going to ask about Benny Logan. Howie Roseman's going to say, well, you know, we'd love to have Benny back. But at the end of the day, it doesn't matter what he says to us. It matters what he offers to Benny Logan. And I'm not sure that the Eagles are going to be able to bring Benny Logan back. They have one of the worst 2017 cap situations right now. Now, they should be able to create some room. They can release guys like Connor Barwin, save about $8 million. Ryan Matthews, save about $4 million. But still, relative to the rest of the league, they don't have that much money to spend. But Howie Roseman, obviously, is one of the, if not the most active GMs in the league. So the Eagles are going to make moves, but I don't think he'll show his cards at all. He'll say, we want Benny, but we'll see what happens. He'll say, we'll look into, we'll evaluate how everybody did and see if we need to bring in cornerbacks or wide receivers or whatever. But I don't think he'll get much insight, but we'll definitely have plenty of questions to ask him.
I just hope that he doesn't give the typical answer of, hey, we were a few plays away from making a playoff run. I know he's not going to bash the talent on the roster that he did create, but I would like to hear tomorrow that he does realize that there are a lot of holes on this team, specifically at some areas that every fan can tell you about, Josh.
Yeah, and that's one of the things that I think the Eagles were one play here or one play there away from winning is just weak because the majority of NFL games this season were decided by one score or less. And every single team in the NFL could say, oh, well, if we did this or that better, then we could have had an additional win. But at the end of the day, the Eagles consistently did not make plays at the end of games to win. And that's what it came down to. And you're right about the obvious holes. Receiver and cornerback are obviously the two most glaring. Now, before that Cowboys game, I was thinking it was more likely that the Eagles would bring back one of the starting cornerbacks, Nolan Carroll, on a cheap deal. But after that performance, it was, even against the Cowboys backups, Nolan Carroll did not have a great game. So I would actually expect both of the cornerbacks, Leos McLane to be cut, save $3 million with him, and then Nolan Carroll just not bring him back because he'll be a free agent. And then at receiver, I think they're going to have to take someone both in the draft and in free agency because you need a lot of talent, but also some veteran presence at that position. Jordan Matthews, he's 24. He's the oldest receiver the Eagles have. They need some veterans there. And cornerback, that's also a position where they could go after in the draft and in free agency because it's that big of a need.
If you had to put a percentage on it, what are the chances Deshaun Jackson's back in Philadelphia next year?
I would probably put it at about maybe 25 or 30. There's definitely interest on his end to want to come back. And the Eagles, I think, will definitely at least talk to him. But at the end of the day, it's easy to say at this point, for Deshaun that he would like to be back in Philadelphia. It's another thing for him to say, okay, well, these other teams offered me $8-9 million more, but I'm going to take that. I'm going to take less money and go back to Philadelphia. So I think just by the nature of how much other teams can offer him compared to the Eagles, they won't be able to get a deal done. He'll probably end up getting a deal probably around maybe $8 or $9 million, maybe even more. And I just think that other teams will price out the Eagles.
When you take a look at what really is this offseason, and I'm also going to say the offseason after that, those two off seasons will define what this Eagle era is with this current regime. A lot of people still don't love Howie Roseman. Some people support him, some people don't. Where's your confidence of this team, of Howie Roseman and Joe Douglas just being such a crucial factor in these next two off seasons? So where do you stand with your confidence level as someone that covers this team on a daily basis with those two gentlemen?
Well, for Joe Douglas, my confidence is extremely high because, he didn't join the Eagles, obviously, until after, they went through the draft process and evaluated all those guys and going through free agency and making those types of decisions. And so he comes from a Baltimore organization. He's credited with really pushing the Ravens to draft Joe Flacco, which obviously turned out pretty well, and a few other Pro Bowlers for them. So he has a really strong background in terms of identifying talent. And that's something that really the whole Ravens organization, they have a very strong reputation. So I thought that was a great hire, and I think that's really going to pay off for them. But Howie Roseman, it's kind of tricky for me because obviously a lot of his decisions haven't panned out, but the biggest one, trading up to get Carson Wentz, looks pretty good. So, I think there's plenty to be critical of him, but when it comes to the most important decision he's made, it looks like he hit on it. But the question with Howie, it hasn't been, can he negotiate a good contract or can he negotiate a good trade? It's can he identify and evaluate talent? And so, that's really what's going to come down to the next two off seasons. He hasn't done a good job of evaluating talent at cornerback. He hasn't done a great job evaluating talent at receiver in the past. So it's really going to come down to he hit on quarterback, but can you build around him? Because as the Colts have shown, having a franchise quarterback is not enough, even though that makes you a contender. You need to build around and give your quarterback some tools to work with.
And really, it starts in the trenches, and we know what that offensive line is right now. You have a mix of some youth. Brandon Brooks isn't going anywhere. I'm intrigued by someone like Halipuli Vaitai, and you expect Lane Johnson, hopefully, if he could just stay clean, he's going to be probably your starting left tackle of the future. Peters is up there in age, and he has a big, hefty price tag next year. What happens with Peters, you think, in this offseason?
Really, I don't think anything happens with him because I understand the temptation to try to restructure his contract to lower his cap hit. It'll be about $11.2 million over the next two seasons. But, to restructure his contract, you're going to have to backload more guaranteed money. Do you really want to give him guaranteed money into his age 38 season or later? But also, really, his cap number, $11.2 million next year, that's about 8th or 7th among NFL offensive tackles. And he's played up to that. He's been a top 10 offensive tackle this season. So even though he has one of the biggest cap numbers, he's actually one guy that, although they'll be tempted to try to decrease his cap hit, I think they'll be kind of worried about, do we really want to guarantee him more money 3 or 4 years down the line?
When it comes in terms of the center position with Kelce, in the beginning of the year, a lot of people were down on him, but I thought that he improved and stepped up big time in the last few games of the season, in the second half of the season. How do you evaluate Kelce's season this year?
Yeah, absolutely agree. I think the first 3 games, even Jason Kelce would tell you that he didn't play well at all, but he played a lot better after that, particularly in the second half of the season. But the thing that I actually think is interesting with him is even though he played better, and the Eagles would save about $3.8 million by cutting him, and I think he's worth that. But I think Seumalo actually really impressed me in his game time. He played right guard for them. He played right tackle. He played left guard for them. So he's a guy that showed not just skill but versatility, and I think the Eagles would have no problem. And Doug Pederson touched on this a couple of weeks ago. He wouldn't mind throwing Isaac Seumalo in at center if he had to. And so I actually think the rise of Isaac Seumalo and the fact that he looks like a future NFL starter could actually displace Kelce and cause him to get cut, even though he improved after that rough stretch to start the year.
The thing that gives you a lot of hope, and I did agree with what you said a little bit earlier in this interview, how the Eagles can't afford to be the Colts, and Ryan Grigson has just done an awful job in Indianapolis. But I think this was a pretty positive year for the quarterback and year number one of Carson Wentz. Sure, did he have some interceptions and some turnovers? Yes, and going down the middle of the field, he has to be careful for. Overall, since you've seen him play each and every snap in the National Football League in 1 year, just what kind of grade do you give Carson Wentz for year one in Philadelphia?
Good question. I would probably give him a B, and even that is it's a little bit tough to give him a grade just because he has very little talent at receiver to work with, and obviously the injuries and the suspension of Lane Johnson on the offensive line. But one of the things that impressed me the most about Carson Wentz was how much he could handle pre-snap. You don't see many rookie quarterbacks at all do what he did in terms of changing the plays, changing the protections. I think that was actually one of his best attributes this year that's kind of underrated is his audibling. I mean, you would see time and time again he would change a play. It would lead to a first down or maybe even a touchdown. And you don't see guys his age with not that much experience do the things he did. But then also even, we know the arm strength. We know he can make all the throws. But another kind of more off-the-field thing, just the command and the leadership and the presence that he has in the locker room, and the respect that he's commanded from his teammates. I was really shocked because even, off the record, guys would talk about back in the offseason when Sam Bradford was still here, how they just respected the work that Carson Wentz put in and the way he carries himself. So those were things that, that was part of the reason the Eagles liked him going into the draft was they really liked his intangibles and really just his mental processing and his football IQ and what he can do for you at the line of scrimmage. And I think that paid off even maybe a little bit better than they anticipated.
I'll ask you the same question because in this league, a good coach and a good quarterback usually gets you a chance to compete for that Lombardi trophy. What kind of grade do you give Doug Pederson for this year?
Ooh, that's a tough one. I would say maybe about a C+. He had kind of similar to Carson Wentz. He didn't, people would criticize his play calling. I actually think a lot of the criticism of the play calling or going for two is overblown just because of how much the math supports it, of how often teams convert on fourth down when they do go for it. But also just didn't have many tools to work with. I think the fact that you saw him use Josh Huff on those speed sweeps kind of spoke volumes to the lack of talent and the lack of weapons the Eagles have because handing the ball off to Josh Huff was actually one of the better weapons and one of the better ways they could utilize the talent they had on offense. And so he definitely made some mistakes. The play calling in the Giants game, I don't have a problem going for it on fourth down as he did, but I think the QB sweep to the outside, that was a head-scratching play call. Challenging a 2-yard gain a few weeks ago was a head-scratcher. So you have some of those kind of big-picture decisions of what was he thinking there, but rookie head coach, not much to work with on offense. He's definitely in my kind of wait-and-see category, and I'm really curious to see how he does next year because if he has another losing season, the Eagles might be looking for another head coach this time next year.
The last one is we're talking to Josh Paunil. Let's just get the final reaction from you on the old coach, and that was Chip Kelly, fired from San Francisco after only 1 year in on the job. Is that at all surprising to you? And it makes you ask the question, did Chip get a fair deal in San Francisco?
It's not surprising at all just because that roster is so devoid of talent that Vince Lombardi couldn't do much with that roster. Trent Baalke at GM was just he just did a terrible job building a roster for whoever the head coach was, whether it was Chip, Jim Tomsula before him. Obviously, when they built up the rosters to go to the Super Bowl and the NFC Championship games, Scott McLuhan, who's now in Washington, had a lot to do with that. And so just for Jed York, the 49ers owner, this is kind of going back a few years, but to side with Trent Baalke over Jim Harbaugh, even as unpopular as Harbaugh can be in the building, it's just a head-scratcher. And so, Chip Kelly didn't do much with the team. It's not like you can point to a season and say, yeah, well, here's X, Y, and Z of why they should have kept him. But no matter who the head coach was this year, you were really set up for failure. And that's why I actually was, I don't want to say surprised he took the job, because obviously it was the only thing available to him. But I was definitely curious last year if he should have taken it, because it's a really hard situation to go in and win when you have a GM that's that incompetent.
Josh, appreciate the time. I'll see you tomorrow. Thanks so much. This was great.
Thanks for having me, Zach.
Thanks so much. There's Josh Paunil joining us from Birds 24/7. Does a great job covering the Philadelphia Eagles. This is the Zach Gelb Show, Fox Sports 920, the Jersey. The McLane thing was just so stupid. And it's ironic that people in communications did an awful job handling and communicating with a member of the media. And I'm not someone that's going to tell you all members of the media have the proper etiquette in the press box. Because I've sat next to some people that I think to myself, wow, this person's etiquette is just awful. And sometimes we just freak out about things with sports and we take them too seriously. This was one of those incidents. Everything I've read and every witness that was there think that this whole situation was absolutely ridiculous. And it was. Jeff McLane, and as someone that's had relationships with PR people in teams in college and in the professionals, when you're around the team almost every day, you develop relationships with those PR people. And yes, you both have different agendas. The fact, though, that they escorted Jeff McLane out of the press box and ejected him. This is one of the main writers for the Inquirer that covers the Eagles on a daily basis, and they couldn't resolve this issue in a more positive way in the last game of the season and talk it out like adults, and you have to eject the man, is stupid. Very stupid. And the Eagles should be ashamed of themselves for how they handled this situation. And I know some fans may say, oh, well, we don't care, blah, 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 blah. Well, you know what? Jeff McLane does a great job for you fans, providing you compelling takes that are fair, and also he gets you good quotes. Even when he's kicked out of the game, he was getting quotes after the game from Lane Johnson. So he gives the fan really good access. And I know anyone could go, if you're a media member, get the fan access. He gets you good access. There's a difference. The way Jeff McLane was treated is just disgusting. And the Eagles should owe him an apology. Now, to touch on some stuff that we did talk about with Josh Paunil, I don't think Benny Logan's coming back. I think Peters is coming back. The wide receivers, I don't want to see Aguilar in an Eagles uniform again. I don't want to see DGB in an Eagles uniform again. They'll probably get a chance to make the roster. They need help. This team needs a lot of help. Wide receivers, they have to get the offensive line younger. The cornerbacks, no one can cover anybody. Oh yeah, and running back is an issue as well. If I had to take a guess, if they were just going to draft based off need in the first round, which it always doesn't work that way because some team can miss someone. Just look at Tunsil, that video that came before the draft, and now Tunsil's having a pretty darn good career. Unless if there is a player that comes available that's a can't-miss talent, if they're just going based off need, I think they go corner in the draft in the first round, and there's a bevy of corners that are available in this upcoming draft. In terms of Chip, and my confidence, I need to see more from Howie Roseman. I don't have great confidence in Howie. And also with Doug, that's still an incomplete. I was not very confident with Doug this year in some of his decision-making. In terms of Chip, I can't stand Chip. I'll preface it by saying that. If you listen to the show, you know I don't like Chip Kelly. He was an awful coach, and I didn't like him from the start. With Chip, though, I said that Chip should have never taken that 49ers job, and the 49ers should have never hired Chip. It wasn't a good marriage. I was a little bit surprised that they canned him after 1 year, but Josh brings up a great point. The fact that they could not find a way to keep Harbaugh, and they decided with Balky over Harbaugh, is one of the biggest mistakes you'll ever see in the history of the National Football League. The 49ers got to 3 straight NFC Championship games. And sure, Harbaugh could be a pain in the ass, but that man's a damn good football coach. A damn good football coach. 49ers are a disaster. You just hope that the Eagles, and with everything that goes on with Howie, that Jeffrey has the right man in place. Because if they botch these next 2 drafts and the next 2 free agency periods, and I believe that Deshaun's coming back, but if they botch these next 2 off seasons, they're going to be the Indianapolis Colts. Well, they'll be 8-8. They'll have a quarterback that could get them into some games, keep them into some games, maybe go on a little playoff run, but they're not going to win a Super Bowl. You need to surround this team with talent, and the Eagles desperately need talent.